My name is Christopher Stubbs. I'm the Divisional Dean for Sciences within the Faculty of Arts and Sciences here at Harvard. And one of our divisional objectives across departments, units, and colleagues within the science and mathematics and statistics enterprise at Harvard is that we move forward to increase the inclusive excellence that we have here at Harvard University and continue to attract the best and brightest people on the planet to our institution to do their great work. And in a community of respectful learners, disseminate, advance, and contribute to society in the domain of knowledge in science and technology. I am absolutely honored to welcome my colleague, Dean Claudine Gay, who's the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, who will introduce our speaker. Dean Gay.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you for creating this occasion for all of us to come together. And especially thank you and the entire really Division of Science for all of your ongoing efforts to build a community of inclusive excellence in the sciences. And as Chris says, to make the division a place where all members of the community can thrive. And today's event really is just one example of the good work that's been happening across the division to align our institutional commitments to diversity, inclusion, and belonging with concrete action and real change in your community. There is still lots of important work to do, but I'm grateful for the forward momentum that you've established and also for the intentionality and courage and productive impatience that the division has brought to this urgent work. Your leadership on this truly, it's appreciated, and I hope you know honestly that it's an inspiration for all of us. So thank you for that. So these are issues that I'm keenly focused on at the level of the FAS as well. This fall, as you know, we welcomed the inaugural FAS Associate Dean of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging, Cherie Ohen. And Cherie has hit the ground running and has already become a household name in many quarters of the FAS. In addition to building out an FAS-wide strategy for inclusive excellence, Cherie has been contributing to a number of efforts launched this fall, including a working group that has been focused in particular on expanding leadership opportunities for staff of color in the FAS. She's also been serving on the FAS task force on visual culture and signage, which is working to foster a more dynamic and inclusive imagery across the FAS. She's been a terrific partner, and as I'm sure Chris can attest, has already done a lot to advance our thinking, challenge some of our assumptions about what can and can't be done, and also just push us all forward in our work to create a more equitable FAS. And it is in that spirit that it's my sincere pleasure to welcome our guest of honor this afternoon, Dr. Freeman Hrabowski. Dr. Hrabowski is one of higher education's most celebrated and influential leaders. If I actually took the time to list all of his many accomplishments and the accolades he's collected, we might not have any time left for him to speak, let alone time for us to engage in a discussion with him, but I'll try to do him justice. So since 1992, Dr. Hrabowski has served as president of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And in that time, he's transformed a young regional institution into one of the nation's most innovative research universities. Under Dr. Hrabowski's leadership, UMBC has been recognized as a model for inclusive excellence and has been consistently ranked among the nation's leading institutions for undergraduate teaching for more than a decade. Dr. Hrabowski's scholarship is centered on science and math education, with special emphasis on participation and achievement among students of color. He chaired the National Academy's committee that produced the 2011 report, Expanding Underrepresented Minority Participation, America's Science and Technology Talent at the Crossroads. And in 2012, he was named by President Obama to chair the President's Advisory Commission on Educational Excellence for African Americans. That same year, he was named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine. And more recently, he received the American Council on Education's Lifetime Achievement Award and UC Berkeley's Clark Kerr Award. His most recent book, The Empowered University, examines how university communities support academic success by cultivating an empowering institutional culture. Dr. Hrabowski is also no stranger to Harvard, where he's awarded an honorary doctorate, recognized for his work enabling high-achieving students of all backgrounds, particularly underrepresented minorities, to earn advanced degrees and research careers in science and engineering. Dr. Hrabowski is a leader I've long admired, and we are just so fortunate to have him with us today. So Dr. Hrabowski, welcome back to Harvard, and thank you for joining us and sharing your insight with us today.
Thank you very much, Dean Gay and Claudine and Freeman, please. And as I said to you, I plan to be very conversational in this talk for 25, 30 minutes, so we can have plenty of time for questions and answers. I begin with poetry. William Carlos Williams once said that it's difficult to find news in poems, and yet men die miserably every day because of a lack of what's found there. And so I begin with an inaugural poem from almost 30 years ago, from my beloved Maya Angelou. And my mother, who was an English teacher, loved Zora Neale Hurston. And somehow when I think of this wonderful woman, Maya Angelou, I think of the great women of color who've given us poetry. Lift up your eyes upon this day breaking for you. Give birth again to the dream. Women, children, men, take it, this dream, into the palms of your hands. Mold it into the image of your most public self. Sculpt it into the shape of your most private need. Here on the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out and into your sister's eyes and into your brother's face and say simply, very simply with hope, good morning. I am delighted to be here and honored by this invitation. 30 years before Ms. Angelou spoke to our country, literally in 1963, I was a 12-year-old sitting in the back of church in the middle of the week, not wanting to be there, but forced by my parents to come and hear this minister who came to our church from time to time. And the minister, and I'm in the back of the room doing my math. My parents placated me with two things. My algebra, I was doing my algebra, my word problems, and food. I was eating M&Ms, the good kind, the peanut kind with the peanuts. And all of a sudden, I hear this minister say, if the children participate in this peaceful protest, all of America will understand that even our young people know the difference between right and wrong, and they want a better education. And I looked up to see who this guy was. And of course, it was Dr. Martin Luther King. And Dr. King, like Maya Angelou and like Zora Neale Hurston and others, talked all the time about dreams. That same year, as you know, he actually at the March of Washington did this very special speech, I Have a Dream. But in that meantime, if you think about all the things that happened, the Children's Campaign, when I did go to jail, a horrible week, a week that though taught us as little children of color, that what Dr. King said was true, that we must believe that tomorrow can be better than today. And amazingly, when he was there with our parents outside the jailhouse, he said to us, what you children do this day will have an impact on children who've not yet been born. We didn't understand what it meant totally, but we sensed the kind of profundity there. And during that year, as you know from history, we had all kinds of horrible things happen, but including particularly the killing, the assassination of President Kennedy. In addition to all the marches. And what did that lead to? It led to legislation that did change the world in many ways for us in this society. If you think about 1964, when the Southerner became president, President Johnson, the master of the Senate, and we were able to get the Civil Rights Act. And then in 65, we got the Voting Rights Act, but we also got the Higher Education Act. And that leads me into this discussion today about where we are in science and what we learned from the Dr. King period and what he taught us. The fact is that in 1965, most people don't realize that in 1965, fewer than 11% of Americans, about 10% of Americans, had graduated from college. Now, put that in perspective. It was 3 to 4% of Blacks, but it was only 11% of whites. And so I want you to think about the fact that in the mid-60s, the vast majority of Americans did not expect their children to go to college. It came with the Higher Education Act, and a few years later, the Pell Grant Act. And all of a sudden, people who were not from money, people who were not privileged, had opportunities for college. It was in that same period that my university was founded in 1966. I remember so well when Drew Faust gave me the honorary degree, and she said, "The oldest salutes the youngest," from Harvard to UMBC. I was very proud. The fact is, if you think about it, that we've come a long way in thinking about who goes to college and how we have more people appreciating what the college experience does for our country and for humankind. And that is why today we can say, I just looked at the data in 2019, we're up almost to 36%. Over a third of Americans now have a 4-year degree. Large numbers of students also in community colleges, as we know, perhaps 40% of all in higher education. But now we have 36%. And if you break it down in the earlier years, things were Black and white. Today, obviously, many other groups. And so the fastest growing group, Hispanics, Latinx, we're up to about 15, 16%. For Blacks, we're at about 26%. For whites, it's almost 40%. And for Asian Americans, it's slightly over 50%. Understanding that in any of those groups, we must disaggregate the data, because for some groups of Asian background, it is not as high, and for others it is. But you put it all together, and what I'm telling you is a third have obtained bachelor's degrees. Now, why is that important? As we think about what we're doing in science, we have to start with that pool of people who are graduating from college. And what we see that's so amazing is we have come a long way, from the 10% to well over 30%. And for every group, the numbers have gone up. At the same time, when we look at what's happening in science, we do know, it's well documented, that we have great underrepresentation. That is, when looking at the scientific workforce, that people of color are underrepresented in large numbers, particularly across science and engineering. I had the privilege of chairing the National Academy's Committee on Underrepresentation, and we found something that was very interesting. The fact is that we assumed that the problem with underrepresentation was solely a K through 12 problem. And when we had people on the committee from Harvard and MIT to Howard University to Miami-Dade Community College to some of the Texas campuses. But interestingly, as we looked into the data, what we saw was very interesting, that we in America tend to blame others for our problems. So colleges and universities will say it's a K through 12 problem. The high schools blame the elementary schools. The elementary schools blame the families. And the husband says it's the wife's problem. It's that side of the family. We all blame someone. But when we looked at the data, what we saw was that, yes, it strengthened K through 12 substantially. There's no doubt about that. But large numbers of the students who were coming to our colleges and universities, fairly well prepared based on test scores, grades, AP courses, were still not succeeding in science. And we ended with a conclusion that the lowest hanging fruit, where if we wanted to increase substantially the number of students of color from underrepresented groups who were succeeding in science with bachelor's degrees and others going on to get graduate degrees, that we needed to look at the undergraduate experience. It didn't surprise us that only about 22% of students of color who began with a major in science or engineering, well, let's just talk science for a minute, would actually graduate with the bachelor's in science. We were surprised that only about 31% of whites who began with that major will graduate in the natural sciences and engineering. And for Asians, it was only about 41%. And what we learned was that often the more prestigious the university, the greater the chance the student who starts in one of those science areas may leave that area. So it's not just the K through 12 problem. It is something for all of our institutions. And we talk about weed out courses. I remember years ago working with colleagues at Harvard and at Williams and at Xavier and some others to look at some of those issues. And I know that you and others are looking at what's happening in the first 2 years of science. If you've not had a chance to look at my TED Talk on the 4 pillars of college success in science, please do so, because it talks about four major factors. One is high expectations, then building community, then the notion that it takes researchers to produce researchers, and finally that we must become much more rigorous in the approach to evaluation. And let me go into a bit of detail. In terms of the high expectations, of course we have high expectations of our students. We should. But the question is, to what extent do we have high expectations of ourselves? And what else can we do to help students succeed if they come to us with a major in science? What is our expectation of ourselves in helping them, knowing that they're working hard, to be able to succeed? And simply having perfect AP scores in math or chemistry or physics does not by any means ensure that somebody's going to do well in science on our college campuses. And it's in all types of institutions. And secondly, what are we doing to think about teaching and learning in a different way? If you look at our Chemistry Discovery Center at UMBC, for the last 10 to 12 years, we've been writing a number of articles on the success we've had in increasing substantially the number of students who are succeeding. And I would say this, when there is a culture that is concerned about performance of students in these disciplines in general, there will tend to be more opportunities for people of color, students of color, to take advantage of that culture. In our new book on the Empowered University, my colleagues and I suggest something that was said by Eric Weiner in his book, The Geography of Bliss. He said, culture is the sea we swim in, so all-consuming that we fail to recognize it until we step out of it and look back at it. And this is what we suggest in our book. This is what I'm saying in the TED Talk, that we must step out of our culture, step out of and look back and say, where are we not doing what we can do? What else might we do? How do we look at best practices? What can make a difference? So high expectations are very important. Building community. If you've not looked at our 60 Minutes piece on UMBC and our Mauerhof Scholars Program for talented students of color and others in science, please look at it. It's only 15 minutes. It can be shocking in some ways of some things we do, but it does build community among those students. It listens to those students. We start with the summer program and a bridge program and move from there. And they're in cohorts. The first group of Mauerhof scholars came in 1989. We had a wonderful grant from Robert Mauerhof, an MIT graduate, and we started there, and we've been building since then. We've graduated about 1,000 at this point. And the building of community, the first group of students were M1s when I didn't like the name. I didn't like the idea of guns, and yet they chose that. We then got to M16s. I was still unhappy, but they're now up to M32s. And this, so if you think about it, you're talking about 32 cohorts of groups who help each other. And most important, they are moving on towards PhDs and MD PhDs. In fact, we are the lead university in the country in producing Blacks at the bachelor's level who go on to complete MD PhDs. Since 2000, from 2000 to 2018, we produced 42 who had completed MD PhDs. You, Harvard, were number 2. You had produced 17. And then below you, 2 of the top HBCUs who had produced 12 and 11. So you see the numbers are very small for all of us. So much work to do. And we're number 2 in the production of Blacks who go on to get PhDs in science. And that is right behind Howard. We have about 2,000 Blacks out of our 14,000 students. Howard is an HBCU and does a wonderful job. But the key is that whether we're talking about PhDs or MD PhDs, the idea of the high expectations of building community, and then the critical part for faculty, the notion that it takes researchers to produce researchers. All of you know that. And the question is, whose lab are our students moving to? So the 2 critical factors, as you look at all of the articles we've written on the Mauerhof program, on what we've done to redesign courses at UMBC broadly across disciplines, not just in science, but in the humanities and other areas, and to have more group study, more collaboration, more use of technology, more feedback, more active work. We have over 100 companies on our campus in our research park, started by our faculty, some people connected to Hopkins and others in biotech, and some in cyber, but students are working in those. They're working in the Baltimore Washington Carter. They're very involved in labs at the Maryland Medical School and the Hopkins Medical School and at labs on our campus. And so the researchers make such a difference in pulling people into research. I actually have moved that TED Talk from science to talking about in general. If we talk about, it takes artists to produce artists. It takes people in policy to pull others into the work. So it's the notion of what do we do to be even more proactive in moving people into the work. And if I were to say the secret sauce for Meyerhoff, or what we do in producing more students of color, it would be making sure we bring in students who have a background that is a foundation on which we can build. And there's a range, there will be a range, of course, but we now know after 25 years of looking at this, 30 years of what that background must be, even as we work with K through 12 to build up the backgrounds of students. And then we spend the time helping them to build that sense of self, to believe in themselves, and to know that they're doing this not just for themselves, but as Dr. King said to us as children, you're doing this for the community. You're doing this for other people. You want to become a scientist because you may help people you may never see. There's something exciting about that idea. And for us, in changing the culture, we had to get people to stop being quite so excited about physicians and to think more about scientists. And one of our compromises was the physician scientists. And we certainly know we need physicians, but we need scientists. And in communities of color, too few people have known PhDs, as you know. People think of the highest level being necessarily the MD, and we're trying to show them the advantage and what the PhD brings, and then what physician scientists can bring. But with that said, the success has meant, so finally the evaluation. So think about it, high expectations, building community, researchers to produce researchers, and finally, solid evaluation. We've been doing qualitative and quantitative evaluation for over 30 years and following students as they come to Harvard, as they've gone to Stanford, wherever they are, and then looking at them after the experience to determine who's going into the professoriate, who's going into the industrial research, who's going into policy, and what are the reasons for those things. And so what I would say to you is that for us, having the opportunity to evaluate what we're doing and then to change as necessary. One of our major changes in recent years has been that in the early years, we talked to them about academic careers. I had made the assumption when Bob Meyerhoff and I first established the program back in 1988 for the first students to come in 89, that if a Black person got a PhD in biochemistry, the world opens up, all doors open. That's just not true. And we have had wonderful students, complete PhDs at the Ivies, out in California and everywhere else. And what they do will depend on the interaction and relationships they have with people and what they've been thinking about as possibilities. I've seen brilliant young scientists moved away from science in a matter of an interview at nighttime with a great consulting firm and a big shrimp cocktail. And somehow they're going off to be a consultant as opposed to doing the bench science. And that is the point that I would make to all of you, that one of our challenges as we work to produce more people of color in all these areas, whether it's policy or science, is that we know we must diversify the faculty, the professoriate, that the vast majority of faculty are white, and the more prestigious the institution, socially and academically prestigious, the fewer the number, the smaller the number of people of color and Blacks, Latinx, in departments. And one of the parts that's most important has been looking at how we can replicate what we do to have other institutions involved with it. Because people were saying, quite frankly, well, it works at UMBC because you got a Black president. And my point was, no, forget the race of that president. The idea is who has a commitment to inclusive excellence, not only through what he or she says, but through the actual, the actions. As I heard Dean Gay talking about, what's the commitment, the money and the experiences and ways in which we have initiatives. If you get a chance, look at the article that my colleagues and I wrote on a social transformation theory of change, and it's about strengthening the minority participation in higher education. And we talk about the critical factors involving developing this group approach, but also a culture that keeps them from being on the periphery, but brings them into mainstream, for example, and working to get them to see themselves as owning the institution rather than just they are we versus they and some of those things. But with all that said, replication has been very important for Meyerhoff as we think about the difference we can make nationally. And what I would tell you is that the Howard Hughes Medical Institutions, HHMI, the same group that supported work with Harvard and UMBC and Williams and Xavier some years ago, has funded a replication initiative involving two large public universities, Penn State University and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And we've been doing it now for years, 7 or 8 years. And there's now in the last year, couple of years, we've had a piece out from the scientists and leaders of those three campuses in science. And you should look at it because it's a very successful replication of the Meyerhoff at those institutions, looking at the particular components. And right now we are replicating Meyerhoff at Berkeley and San Diego with funding from Chan Zuckerberg. Now, what is the point of all of this? What is the lesson I would tell you? It is that as you as faculty think about what you can do, I would suggest using analytics as we do often to see who's succeeding right now. Who are those students graduating in science who are actually making it? What can we learn from them? So it's the quantitative analysis of those trends, but also the qualitative experience of understanding, using our social sciences to understand what those experiences were of students who succeeded, and also what are the experiences of students who didn't succeed, who may be graduating from Harvard, but started off in science and changed their majors. The data will show you that in America, more and more students don't major in science to go to med school, because they know it's going to be more difficult. Even on our campus, we have found ways that a lot of students who are not going on to biochemistry or to molecular biology, they will take the courses needed for the MCAT, and then they can go to med school. And the question, and that's fine as one approach, but we shouldn't see students leaving science just because it's not easy or not as helpful to them in getting into med school. The question is, how do we keep more students in science, whether they're going into policy, public health, or whatever the area? I will tell you, having strong mentors is very important. Who are the students, who are the faculty, who are mentors to people of color, to women and people of color? And most important, who are those who even go beyond being a mentor to being a champion? The mentor to me is someone who is willing to give advice and to support the student in difficult times. The champion can be even more intrusive in the student's life, will knock down doors to get that student an opportunity to show what he or she can do. One great example that I often use is my colleague, Dr. Mike Summers, an HHMI investigator in biochemistry at UMBC, member of the National Academies. And one of his students who earned her PhD and postdoc under him is there as a professor there in molecular and cellular biology, Victoria D'Souza. I'm very proud of her. And what I want to say that you'll appreciate is she's not only excellent in the science, she was in an environment that gave her a chance to see a mentor who cared about the Black students, Latinx students, and other students. And I have no doubt she is involved in those kinds of things as well on that campus. And so I want you to think about how we produce more mentors and champions, how we have a cadre of students who want to move on and become scientists. We can have them in all other areas, but right now, our challenge, and this is what I really take from Dr. King, that of those who much is given, much is required. What he was saying to us as children was, we had the privilege to hear civil rights leaders talking about another day, that tomorrow can be better than today. And as I was doing my little word problems, I began then connecting solving math problems with the challenges of civil rights, just like my friend Bob Moses and the Algebra Project. And so when I tell kids I get goosebumps doing math, it is really true that I somehow see this world opening up as I've been able to appreciate the mathematics over the years and to help students love the math. Because if students can love the math, but also reading and thinking, they can go into chemistry or physics or any of those areas. I leave you with the hope that we can be far better than we are today. At the national level, at the national agencies, not one national agency can tell me that even 2% of its scientists are Black. I chaired the Obama Commission on Education for African Americans and got all of that data. Not one of the national agencies can say that. And you know how challenging it is in the research communities. In 2019, one of my graduates, a Mouth graduate who's now with the endowed chair at Duke, Khafre Zarasa, received for the first time for a Black, the Neuroscience Young Investigator Award of the world, the Neuroscience Society. He has invented a pacemaker for the brain to address some mental disorders, depression and schizophrenia, and is a major advocate of pulling more into the work. And then in 2020, one of our graduates, a Meyerhoff scholar, actually is the co-leader of the NIH team that had developed the vaccine with Moderna. And their technology is also in some of the other vaccines. But I tell you that because Dr. King would have goosebumps like me right now. This is the first time a Black woman in the world has ever created a vaccine. And when I think about little girls seeing this 35-year-old woman and her excitement about science, coming out of rural North Carolina, coming to UMBC, going on and getting a PhD from Chapel Hill, going back to NIH and working all these years with Barney Graham, and seeing how Graham and Fauci were so wonderful as mentors to her, it should give us all hope about the possibilities. And as right now, as my wife and I are serving as people to go out and talk about the vaccine and the need for Blacks to get it, I talk about the fact that when you get that vaccine, remember the face of that young Black woman who helped create that vaccine. It doesn't get any better than that. I close with words from an alumna of Harvard who dazzled the world a few weeks ago. And I couldn't help but think back to Maya Angelou and now to Amanda Gorman. And she said, "The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light. If only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be at Harvard. Be the light." Thank you.
Thank you. President Hrabowski has been very generous in leaving a lot of time for us to engage in a conversation, and anxious to open the floor up to questions. Dean Gay, I think I know who you are.
So I'm curious. So over the, I guess, almost 30 years, maybe just over 30 years of the Meyerhoff program, what are some of the big changes you've had to make to the educational program itself?
Yes.
In order to boost the persistence numbers? I mean, I found the persistence numbers just breathtaking in their horribleness. 22% of African Americans who enter with, as I understand it, enter with a desire to concentrate in STEM actually persist to the degree. That's shocking. So can you talk a little bit about some of the changes you've made to the academic program to boost persistence?
Sure. So those numbers are national numbers and across institutions.
Oh yeah, I understand that. Yeah.
But what I was going to say is that for us, we were having major challenges in those early years. Now, the Meyerhoff group was different in that we had them almost in a bubble in those first years to give them so much support to see what was possible. Because I could not find one university in the country predominantly white, and ours is a predominantly white campus. It's now maybe 50-some% white, but 20-some% Black and 20-some% Asian. But the fact is that other than some HBCUs may have been sending more on, we didn't have institutions that were predominantly white who were sending large numbers on to science PhDs. And the numbers from HBCUs are small also in relationship to what we need. But what did we do? The two things. Faculty decided that we had a problem, not just with Black students, but with all students, that most were not doing well. That we've always had a mindset that says, well, if it's really good, most people won't make it anyway. That's what we say in science. In fact, I work in the program with new college presidents over in your education college, and every year I'll get questions from presidents saying, how do we convince people that it just doesn't mean you're really great if most students don't succeed? But that's the culture of science. It's only for those of us who are the most elite. That is the challenge in our society across races for all groups. And so what was wonderful was we were learning things from the Meyerhoff program that we could use with students in general. More collaboration, get away from the cutthroat approach, more connecting with faculty, more getting them into research early. The reason so many of our students are admitted to MD, PhD programs is many of them, not just the Meyerhoffs, but others, were published with faculty in referee journals as undergraduates. Many of them have worked on projects for 2 or 3 years, you see, and have that sustained research experience and are excited about the research. But the other part is just redesigning courses. We have a major innovation fund. When I'd become 20-year president in 2012, and the campus decided to have a fundraiser to raise money for an innovation fund, and they wanted to use my name. And I said, no, you use my name and call it the Hrabowski Innovation Fund, I seem like I'm dead or something. I mean, you don't name something, right? And they all laugh. But they did use my name. So there's a Hrabowski Innovation Fund that has a lot of money in it that allows for grants to faculty to experiment on ways across disciplines. We started in science, but across disciplines, interdisciplinarity, science and the humanities, other areas, and they can get grants, 25, 50,000, whatever the amount, and some release time to try a different approach. Probably the most exciting innovation fund was one called the Mathematics of Being Human. The Mathematics of Being Human, with a mathematician and a Shakespeare scholar working on a seminar for freshmen. It was wonderful. But my point is that, so we've spent a lot of time rethinking the courses and looking at ways of giving students more support, not just tutoring, but the group work, and giving and putting much more money into faculty development and support in the use of technology. That was very helpful to us when we had to pivot, as others did, for that. So, I mean, we've been doing a lot of that for years, and that's made the difference. One other point, using the analytics. When I go around consulting with departments and I say, what's the probability that a young Latino woman or a young Black man who comes in to major in biochemistry actually makes it? Most people cannot tell me. They've not looked at the data to disaggregate, to look at background, not just test scores, high school and those things, to say, okay, of the 12 students who tried, how many of them actually succeeded after 4 or 5 years? So the use of data has really been helpful to us in understanding where we have weaknesses.
Rochelle Godet.
Hi, Rochelle Godet. I'm in molecular and cellular biology, and when I'm on campus, I'm actually Victoria DeSouza's neighbor.
Oh,
Just-
tell her I said hello. Please tell her hello for me.
Yeah. And actually, I have a UMBC graduate as a graduate student in my lab right now, Heather Frank.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you. And I know she's good, so thank you.
She is really good, yes.
Thank you.
So I have 2 questions, but I'll start with one, and then if there's time, I might ask another one later. But you talked about mentoring and championing, which I know is really important, and a lot of it is like serious one-on-one work.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, how do you, like, what kind of mechanisms can we do to like multiply that so that there's enough of us doing the mentoring to,
Sure.
as to keep increasing the numbers?
Yes, it's an excellent question. 2 or 3 things. I think there's a very important role for staff to play. There's no doubt about that. And as we have been working to diversify the faculty and to bring in both more women through our advanced program that we've had now 10 or 12 years, I serve as PI, and our program for people of color, our STRIDE program for bringing in postdocs and others. One of the things and all of us are saying to younger faculty when they're junior faculty is they have to be really careful not to be pulled into so much service work that they're not getting the research done. That's one of the challenges, as you know. But secondly, what we've worked to do with other campuses that have replicated Malhoff is to look at ways of using staff strategically for a lot of the advising and mentoring, because a lot of the mentoring may not be about what's happening in the science. There are other kinds of issues, and there are people on the staff side who can help with that. I think of the scientists as people who really get them into the work, into the research, right? And can give them an encouraging story when they're not doing as well. But I know we have to protect, particularly research campuses, protect the time. There's a way to do it. And the challenge for women and people of color so often is those people from those groups come to them for help. So having a mechanism that gives you a chance to have some connection, but to move that person to the right staff to help when it gets to be other kinds of problems is really important. Otherwise, the person can do great work for a few years and then not get tenure. We've seen that over and over again. The other thing I would say, though, is that getting more students into the labs. I mean, our most robust activity occurs in labs when you have a number of students, undergrad and grad and postdocs and people of color, and you can see it. And years ago, I'll never forget actually taking people around to look at who was in whose lab. It's human nature in most places that people from the same countries will be in the same lab. There's nothing wrong with that. People gravitate wherever you go. I mean, you just go around, you'll see that. And you'll see more women in labs of people with women. I mean, often you will see that, and that's fine too. But the question I asked my colleagues 25 years ago, so where did Black kids go? We had no Black faculty, no Latinx faculty, and so it took 2 things. And somebody said, oh, they just need to come up to us. No, it doesn't work like that. No, it takes a 2-pronged approach. It takes helping students to know how you go, and they need to be entrepreneurial to try to get into a lab, but it also takes allies, faculty who will say, we're looking for somebody, help us find somebody. This is why a structured program that works on knowing as much about those students and having good ties to faculty can let you build the numbers that way. Can't be done just by faculty. Staff are really important. Great question.
Thank you, Rochelle. Next in line is Flora Brookgarden.
Hey, thank you so much for that great lecture. So I'm in astronomy in a grad student, and so I actually have a question. I really appreciated what you said about creating a support network and especially building community.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also read in several studies that often, especially in STEM fields and in these elite universities like Harvard, one of the challenges is the hierarchy that's present, that especially for also Black students or Black faculty, creates a barrier to approach when there are concerns. So I was wondering if you have any advices of practical steps that universities like Harvard can take to kind of break some of that hierarchy.
Sure. I would start, I mean, it's not just Harvard. I would say universities in general have that kind of challenge, given Harvard as the most prestigious, but universities have those challenges. There's several things I would say. Again, having opportunities for robust conversations about honest perceptions about what's going on. Having students of color and others talk about their experiences in their first year or two in science at the institution, what works well, what does not work well. Getting a chance to talk to students who did not do well, to get them to open up. One of the problems with culture is when students are high achieving, and yours are certainly high achieving, my students are high achieving. We have kids from 100 countries with half the students having a parent from another country, many who are from military families, but there's discipline, hard work. We are a nerdy public university, very nerdy. All right, we're very proud of that. National cyber champions one year. Right? But the fact is that many students don't do well, and they did well in high school, so they don't want to talk about not doing well. It's a real challenge. And the more serious the campus is, the harder it is for students to say, I'm not doing well, or I didn't do well. It's like a secret that you just keep moving, or you change your major. But getting people to talk about their experiences. In our Mauhoff cohort groups, we will say, who's excited about the work? What really is turning you on? What are you passionate about? But then where are the problems? I mean, the courageous students will be that we get people to get in the habit of saying, listen, I'm really having a problem in analytical chemistry, and here's my challenge, and who can help me out? So it's changing that culture so that people understand, unlike in high school when you didn't need help, our assumption is everyone needs help at some point. I don't care about the perfect SAT or whatever. Everyone needs help at some point. So getting that culture to change, which only occurs when students and colleagues, faculty get a chance to talk about what the experience is right now and look at the data to see who's succeeding. That would be my suggestion. Mm-hmm.
Bill Anderson.
Hi, Dr. Hrabowski. Good to see you again.
Hey there, good to see you.
I had a kind of a follow-up question to Rochelle Godet's question. So, Meyerhoff, with that program, the community that you establish among the students is great, to the point where they walk the classes together, right? But how can, does the program help the mentors, especially since, as you said, they're scattered at the med school or maybe in a company?
Yeah.
What does the program do to kind of make sure that that culture and the mentoring is a good fit as well for when they go into the labs to do their work?
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. I'm proud of you. And thank you for what you say. It's a great question. We work systematically with mentors around the country. First, to get feedback. If students are coming there for the summer or at Hopkins APL for the summer, we want the feedback on those students both ways. We want to see what scientists think about our students, but we want the scientists to know what the students thought of them and the experience, right? And it's amazing how you can learn a lot on both sides when a student says, I didn't get challenged, quite frankly. I did the work they said and they thought I did well, but doc, maybe they just assumed I couldn't do more. You get my point, so on both sides. And the really healthy relationships are those that are sustained over a number of years. And what has helped us is that we have scores of mentors who have worked with our students for years and years. And those students who've been mentored by people, talk about those mentors, and are in contact with them. And there's that network. So probably one of the years ago, when I was trying to get more people to get involved, I wrote to Tom Cech, former head of HHMI, Nobel laureate. He had been kind enough to have mentors since Harold Varmus introduced him to the MyHeart program years ago. And I wrote to congratulate him on becoming the head of Howard Hughes. And this was years ago. And I said, and here's where your 5 students who come out to Colorado over the years, where they are. He wrote me back within a half an hour saying, Freeman, here are the other 4 that you don't know about, and this is where they are. I took that letter and sent it to the entire faculty and said, if this Nobel laureate on another campus can be this connected to his students, ... And it was wonderful. It started conversation. Nobody can tell me they don't have time for these kids. No. And we are still in contact. So it's a great story. That's a true story. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
That's great. Camille Gomez-Laberge.
Good afternoon, Dr. Hrabowski. Thanks for speaking with us today. So just before I ask my question, I just want to share something. Recently, I had read Dr. King's Nobel lecture from 1964. And the images that lecture evoked struck me as so familiar to things around us today. And it makes me think that, maybe we're not doing enough to redeem something that he spoke about, a lag in moral and spiritual progress. This compared to the great scientific progress that has happened. Oh, sorry, I should just say, I'm with the Department of Physics. I teach 2 semesters of introductory physics for science and engineering concentrators.
Okay.
So this lagging moral and spiritual progress, what you had to say today really resonated with what I had read just very recently from Dr. King. You talked about culture, you're talking about mentorship and students leaving sciences to do consulting and other business work. And I wonder to what extent this has to do with, again, just this idea of a lagging moral progress as a community. Is that really the root cause to the symptoms that we're seeing? Racial injustice, poverty, war, this stuff. Now climate crisis is another one we can add to that list.
Sure.
So could you share with us what you think we are getting right in terms of improving our moral progress, and what you think might be the next best steps to, to reach a higher moral ground?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I often use the language of Jim Collins, who talks about the genius of the and versus the tyranny of the or. When people hear me talking about my excitement about math and science and all that, they immediately assume often that I haven't thought about this other side, which you are absolutely right. We must think about, as Dr. King said, the moral implications of what we do, the ethical questions, the big questions of the day, right? And I say several things. One, that for our own students, we are emphasizing grounding in the humanities and social sciences and the arts for every student, first of all, and having the difficult conversations about inequities in our society, about climate change, but about racial injustice, about health inequities, those kinds of things, the academic achievement gap, right? And so even beginning in the summer program, that 60 Minutes piece, you'll see there is a part on culture. We give them courses in the life sciences in one, if they're interested in engineering or physics, and then of course in culture with an emphasis on people of color and African Americans and others and the challenges they face and the ethical questions. When I wanted to get NSF to fund that, NSF said, well, no, that's not science. I said, but it's essential to producing a scientist. We need people who are able to talk comfortably about the ethical questions that you're talking about. Let me give you historical perspective. When I marched in 1963 with the Children's March in Birmingham, it was all Black children. Everything was Black except for white police, all right? And the dogs and the fire hoses. When I looked at the Black Lives Matter movement this past summer and had tears in my eyes because I saw progress. I saw progress. First, because the light was shining on what is really the case, racial injustice, structural racism. But I also saw people of all races, of all generations, out there marching, saying this is not right. a part of the morality issue is how much are we concerned about people different from ourselves? How comfortable can we be if privilege is only given to one group, you see? And I saw that as never before in our country. And the thought I had was that I'm delighted about the passion and this sense of moral responsibility people are having. And at the same time, I was thinking, but people don't realize it's going to take so much to move the needle. It will not be moved in a day, but it takes proactive. There was a term that Dean Gay used about proactive impatience, or something that was really powerful, because it's true that being impatient, but teaching students how to think critically about science, for example, and its relationship to the universe and to humankind and to the problems we face. We talk in engineering about the grand challenges in engineering. You know, I always said to my friends in engineering, I see a lot of grand challenges here, from water there. I don't see racial injustice in the group. I don't see it there. You know, that is now more than so. I think it is becoming something that everybody's talking about, because it's what your Harvard alumna Du Bois said 100 years ago. The color line question, the question of people of color and other people and these inequities. Do I see progress? Yes, the fact that people are acknowledging this is not in somebody's imagination, this is real. The National Academy study on criminal justice, with some people who from all kinds of backgrounds who said this structural racism is a real thing. The Secretary of Juvenile Services and I, for my state, and I wrote an op-ed piece that upset some people, but we took the data he had, because we supervise 500 little children of color in gangs and who are committing nonviolent offenses between the ages of 8 and 17. And the data shows that a black boy of 13 commits a crime. The white boy commits that same crime. The black boy ends up in jail with a record. The white boy ends up getting off. It happens over and over again. It's just structural in some issues. So my point is, we've made some progress. We've got a lot of progress to make. And we need people like you from the sciences raising the moral and ethical questions. So thank you for that question.
And thank you for the answer. Kezi Cheng.
Hi, Dr. Hrabowski. Thank you so much for your great talk. I am a 5th-year graduate student in the School of Engineering at Harvard, and I have so many questions, but feel free to answer whichever one you want to. The first one is I guess maybe the easier question is, what extracurricular activities do you think promote community building and help retention in STEM outside of classes? The second question is, what do you think the role of political scientists is in the next decades or a few decades? And the reason with that is because recently I feel like as scientists, we're getting backlash for having opinions in politics and policy. And, you know, like, how do we do this and be good scientists? That's a second question. And the third question is more of a comment and suggestion to Harvard. And I just wanted to put it out here right now in front of everybody. So I went to public school in Brooklyn, South Brooklyn, and then I went to high school in the Bronx. And then I went to MIT, and then I went to Harvard. So going from where I came from to where I am now, you just see less and less people. It feels like there's an elevator that, like, you know, helps you get to where you want to go. But then you feel like you're leaving people behind as you get there. So it's a really weird feeling. And I remember one of the first events that I went to as a PhD student in our group was in this room where I don't remember, it's a room in Gordon McKay that had, I think, 15 portraits of white men in the room. And I ask around and I look around, I'm like, who are these people? And then my advisor starts telling me about all of the, like, incredible accomplishments they've done, and they've contributed to the scientific community and everything. And I was like, okay, this room is full of portraits of white men. It doesn't really feel good being in that room, listening to someone defending, thinking about you being there in a few years, and then not knowing if there's any room on the wall for you in the future. And so I made the suggestion. I was like, what if we take half of those down and just leave them empty? What if we just leave them empty, and then people ask, you know, why are those other walls not, like, filled with portraits. And then you can actually say, you know, like, this is for the future scientists, rather than just continuously, constantly, like, just showing what Harvard has done in the past, but rather leaving room, like actual physical space for things that could be there in the future. That's something that I just would suggest we do at Harvard.
I appreciate, first of all, one of the points in my book is that we talk about retriever courage. Our dog's name is True Grit, and he's a Chesapeake Bay Retriever. And we talk about retriever courage, and we talk about the courage to listen even when we don't like what we hear or when it's different from what we were thinking, and having the courage to say what may not be popular. So I commend you on your courage for saying it. I think there are different ways of doing it, but I do get your point. I do know that often when I'm in rooms around the country, when it's prestige, it's going to be all white men, often, okay? And I have said this, I'll tell you a story that you'll appreciate. I drive myself. Presidents often have drivers, and in my state, but I drive myself, and I drive a black car. And I was going to a meeting at the National Academy of Sciences, and for the second or third time, the person at the gate said to me, "Who are you the chauffeur for? Who are you the chauffeur for?" That was the only reason I could be at the National. I had a suit and tie, and I had on in a black car, but I was the chauffeur, right? And so finally, in one of the prestigious meetings, I said to the group, I'll know that we've made progress here at the National Academies when the gate people stop asking me if I'm the chauffeur. Okay. Well, the National Academy did something very interesting. They found pictures of people who may not be in the National Academies, but who are doing big stuff in science, women and men and people of color, to put on some walls. And so, I mean, I thought it was a very creative way of doing it. I don't necessarily agree with taking out people who had a great accomplishment. I think it's got to be genius of the and tyranny of the or. I think we get into problems when we take away somebody's accomplishment. There are places for them too, but there should be places for people who are coming along and people who are on the way, so that people can see people of all backgrounds. So I think you got an idea that is going to come to fruition as time goes on. Because if you are the same as the people on the wall, it looks just great. But if you're different and nobody looks like you, it does feel like you're isolated. So it's a part of what I call culture change, not to take away from anybody and what they've done, but to do the other. And then about service, the last part of this, let me say this: we have, as a part of the actual requirement, is that students are involved in service. What kind of service? They're doing several things. One, especially tutoring children in the inner city. Our campus is in the suburbs out at the BWI airport, about 600 acres, but we have buses going into the city all the time, and kids take their cars in. So we have certain inner city schools we work with on math and science and reading, and working with industry to bring engineers in and others, and with an emphasis on improving test scores and having children excited about the science, excited about the math. And then the other thing that my student, but other UMBC students, is we have a great incentive for people to tutor on campus, to help students in groups, in the chemistry tutorial center, over in engineering, in working on mini Baja and stuff, and to have people working. So it's connecting people more than ever. And that helps us see how privileged we are. When you go into a 5th grade class and see children who can't read well, or who still don't know fractions, you realize how fortunate you are. So service in communities, very important. Thank you.
And thanks for the great suggestion. Cassandra Extavor.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, thank you. My name is Cassandra Extavor. I'm a faculty member in MCB and OEB, so molecular and organismic, and I'm a biologist.
Great.
I wanted to ask you a question relating to your emphasis on the importance of mentors for students of color, of faculty mentors, scientists at the bench. Of course, this is incredibly important. And I'm wondering if you could give us some examples of things that you found work to help deal with issues of faculty who are not good mentors and are poor champions. Because just as the right mentor and the right champion at the right moment can make the difference between staying in science or leaving it,
yes,
the wrong mentor at that moment will just remove people from the field. And I know that we have very few mechanisms in institutes of higher education to remove faculty, especially once they're tenured, or to make them do anything differently than how they would like to do things. And we have a tendency, I think, to maybe quietly steer students away from certain places, away from certain labs, and towards other labs. and that doesn't really remove the eternal problem.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you have examples from your institution where faculty who one might have thought, oh my gosh, the last thing we should ever do is, you know, put a student with them, but you've been able to find ways to help this person want to do things differently and have different outcomes with students.
It's a great question, because there's two approaches. Let me tell you. The first is the carrot and the idea of having awards for people who are the best mentors. We have presidential and teaching research awards and teaching awards, and we put the mentoring in on both sides. And we highlight people who are excellent in the research and the mentoring, or excellent in the teaching and the mentoring, and we talk about it a lot. And we've got photos around all over campus of scientists working with young women, people of color. In my office, we put up, photos, and then we give awards, financial awards for people who get these. But the other part that I learned from heading the advanced program with several of my women colleagues who are department chairs in advanced women in science, that we had substantive conversations about mentoring. And even in having those conversations, there were people who were saying, oh, here we go again with that warm and fuzzy stuff. And what we were able to show was those departments that were very attentive to the mentoring question and supportive of mentoring had greater success in keeping faculty and in keeping students of color. Those that thought it didn't matter had more faculty leaving, junior faculty and women and others, and students, and we could show the analytics of that. Now, what it led to was a really sticky conversation, and I finally said something that shocked people after hearing and looking at different departments and knowing the people. I said, some people just are not good mentors. And I don't care what you do, they're into their work and that's it. And if you got a student who doesn't need mentoring, then that's okay. But most of us need some support. We just need to call it as it is. If we're talking about science and speaking the truth without emotion, then some are excellent, some are really good, but others are not good mentors. They are not. And we have to accept that. And if somebody wants to change, but when you're 55 or 60 and you're a great researcher, it's rare that you're going to really want to change your approach. It just is. I like to say to fellow people in STEM, we are not warm and fuzzy people anyway. I mean, you see why people move to the humanities, because they get a little more attention. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't exceptions, but we tend to be focused on the math problem. You see, so there is a difference. But I think being honest about that and having the honest conversations, when we had the University of Michigan players to come, and with all of our STEM faculty, we were working on the advanced program because we had such a small number of women faculty. This was 12, 14 years ago. We're now up to 30-some% are women, but then it was about 12%. It was just that bad, all right? But nobody saw it was a problem except women and people of color. So we had the University of Michigan people come in who had observed us, and they did these department chair scenarios using what they had seen in department chair meetings. And people were shocked at how often women are cut off, and shocked at the approach people take to looking at new people being considered, and it allowed us to have those painful conversations to move to the next level with the idea that we're not pointing fingers at anybody. We're just trying to understand, look in the mirror itself, and that's what people have to do. Great question. Thank you.
I'm going to just abuse my privilege as host here to pose a question of my own for something that I've been struggling with, and that is, Harvard's a great institution. Our goal is to make the world a better place, but it is an elitist institution. And in some ways, Harvard's reputation derives from a historical image of rejecting people. That's how we're an elitist place. And it's a significant institutional transition to shift to becoming excellent by virtue of inclusion, and at the same time having the international impact that we do and retaining the excellence of the institution, but formulating that, and I would say articulating it in a different way. Yes. And I wonder if you could help me try to understand how to chart a path forward for our division to reconcile those things that are in superficial contradiction.
Sure. Let me start by saying that I appreciate your honesty. that we know you are exclusive in many ways, in every sense of that word. You are the richest and the most powerful. We start there, okay? And we're all proud when our kids are admitted to Harvard, for example. And we've had a number admitted, especially to medical and MD. I find that medical schools and MD, PhD, particularly medical schools, are a little, sometimes more enlightened than science departments. And that I want to say that to be provocative, just to be provocative, all right? In that they see the need for more people of color who are in medicine. You know, it's more urgent in some ways, people think, that in science, you see. And I will tell you, in a number of cases, our students who've been admitted there have not gone there because they just don't think of it as a place they necessarily want to be. We've had a number to go there, a number of my Black kids and white kids who've gone there, but there are other places that have shown even more humanity, even when they've been admitted. One of the suggestions I would make that has happened I've worked with Stanford's people in some areas, Penn's people, the Southern Georgia Tech is going to do things, but literally looking at the Stanford Berkeley situation and been working with them. The fact is, the more faculty come to a campus to work to identify students and to start working with students in undergrad programs, for example, sophomore and junior year, and get them back into those labs so they can really see the potential just to do that, if you think about it. And the more they become champions for those students coming to grad school there. But then even at the next level, because I'm telling you, one of my best students who graduated in biophysics at Harvard went for, and there's nothing wrong with going to a consulting firm. It's okay, except she was so good in science. And she kept talking about that great big shrimp cocktail she had. And before I knew it, she'd gone off for a lot of money to the prestigious consulting firm. And I just thought to myself, we never help to understand how important it is, once graduating from the PhD, to do a postdoc and do bench science. This is, somebody asked me how we have changed at UMBC. We've expressed that idea that for us, we need to make it important, make that point that this bench science stuff is really cool. That what you got to do is not just be good at it, but make it your life's work. And then later on, if you want to do something else. So that was on our part. But I am saying to you that one of the things I think Harvard can do, and they do some of it, but can do much more, is to have more faculty working with faculty at campuses where we see people with the potential. We have students who clearly, if they can get into Stanford, they can get into U, and we've got them going there and other places, and a few who've come through. We have many more who've gone through MD and MD PhD programs at Harvard than strict science. We need to know it, and having Victoria there, for example, really does make people look at it. Yes. Yeah. I'm saying one of the approaches you can take in terms of is to build relationships with institutions who have a pool of students from your fellow Ivies and other places, but relationships with students and identifying really high achieving people. The young woman I mentioned who is now the lead scientist with Graham at NIH had been working with Chapel Hill since high school, and then came to Mauhoff, and then went to NIH and worked with Graham in Graham's lab since she was 19. So when she graduated from university, so she's been doing it all, identifying people early and moving them ahead. Let me give you an example from another field that you'll appreciate. We're the #1 producer of kids who go to NSA. That's mathematicians, cyber scholars. Why? Because this corridor is the intelligence community, and large numbers of our parents are from that community. And so kids who don't want to go into the military, these are middle class, working class kids, they love working at NSA because it's seen as the smartest place for math majors. Now, right now, I'm getting more of them into some of the finance places because I want some of those big checks. You're not going to get a big check at NSA. But the fact is, NSA starts working with kids. A lot of my kids start working there when they're 15. And they work there on real problems in those years before. And they even give us money to produce kids of color who will do that. And so they are nurturing that talent all along the way. And they know, and so some of their PhDs now are my students. The same thing with the Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. The head of APL has this PhD in computer science from UMBC. He is determined to get as many kids of color into APL, which is almost half of Hopkins, right? So we've got a number of Black PhDs who've worked there in undergrad school, went off to grad school, came back there. So the idea of building relationships and being known as a place that wants to nurture those relationships. I mean, just being here on the call with you, gives me a sense of the humanity of the place, of the people interested in the issues, you see. I'd seen that from the medical school, from some, more so than science, just to be honest with you. And I often see that, not because people aren't nice, but they haven't thought about that outreach to people who really can make it, can do it if you work with them.
Great. Scott Edwards.
Hi, President Hrabowski. Thanks so much for a great talk. I'm Scott Edwards. I'm professor in organismic and evolutionary biology. And yeah, we do have a challenge with diversity in ecology and evolutionary biology generally. And I was struck by a statement you made about, the student who gets siphoned off into consulting, for example, rather than pursuing a career in science. And I'm just curious how you can foster that desire to go into science. It seems to me it's challenging partly for financial reasons because, some of these places can offer them, but it's also challenging in terms of the values that we engender in students as to what they choose to go into. So how do we sort of navigate that?
It's an excellent point. And this is where we pivoted in the Maurer program when somebody said, how have we changed things? In the early years, we just said PhD, 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 and MD if you got to, and then MD, PhD, but we didn't talk about why enough. We just thought they would be excited about the research. Well, turns out a lot of people beyond the academy and beyond research labs will take PhDs and they can do good work. So this is not to be critical of consulting, any of that, but I am so focused on wanting to see more people in the professoriate, because that's how you have students seeing people like themselves, right? And what I would say is, so in the last 15 years, the program is 30 years old, we have many more people going to PhD programs with the idea of becoming a researcher, for sure, because we've talked about it a lot. And the money, it's not, people say it's money. No, the money is reasonable. You can live a good life, but it's this idea that you're doing something for humankind. If you start talking to people about that in their freshman year, the environment is a very major theme on my campus, from environmental engineering, environmental science, environmental policy, all kinds of programs and major work with everything from NASA to the large numbers, Mid-Atlantic Water Science Center on our campus, a lot of stuff, places where they can get into this work. And the key is always to get them into labs so they can see what's possible in our Institute for Marine and Environmental Technologies, because they haven't seen it. They just don't know it. They don't know about it. And that's a part of the issue. But I think, the thing I would say to Harvard and in general, I mean, you are supposed to be producing the leaders in the world. And you do a lot of that already. But the idea of, and I know so many of my friends who have degrees from Harvard who are wonderful in the social sciences and law and things like that. But I mean, the vision that Dr. King would want you having is to become one of the leading developers of Black scientists, Latino scientists. And you do a few, but you can do so much more because you're getting the creme de la creme and they're leaving science. This is a part of the issue. And I would say, but when you talk to them, if you look at the Maurer, the 60 Minutes piece, we talk to them about their being the next generation of leaders in science and about what they will do. And so now having people like Kizzmekia Corbett, who has now created this vaccine, every young woman wants to create a vaccine. You get a few doing it, and it's wonderful. It just makes all the difference in the world. So I think it's about that moral composition, the conversation we were having earlier when he was talking about what's our moral responsibility. I think that should be a part of our discussion with students. And we say this at UMBC, of those too much is given, much is required. Well, what does Harvard say to its students? I would hope that you've been given the greatest of privileges at the richest university in the world. You have this opportunity to really shine in science. We've had 2 Rhodes Scholars in Black in the last. These were our first in the last 3 years. The first is doing a PhD in nuclear engineering at Oxford, and is determined to focus on some of the environmental issues. And the second, who spent time at Harvard in the summers, has done math and economics, is going to focus on transportation. And people said transportation, they haven't thought about those issues. But being there in Boston and getting a chance to work with Jet Perturba and others over at the National Economic Bureau of Research gave him these ideas of what's possible. You get my point? And I'm suggesting you've got all those opportunities, but it does take building a cadre, a community of students, and they're not all Black, 50, 60% are minority kids, 70 black. But then we've got wonderful white and Asian kids who want to understand underrepresentation. My white students who are in grad school are especially going to be valuable because they've talked about race and those issues. You know, so having a group, mixed group, to talk about the sticky issues starting in the freshman year makes a difference.
Jamila Pigwiz.
Hi, hello. Hi, so thank you so much for talking with us today. I'm a grad student in the astronomy department, and you touched a little bit on this earlier, but I was wondering if you could kind of, if you have any advice for faculty to help, I guess, alleviate the kind of sacrificial lamb problem, where it's like, okay, you know, one of the barriers for, you know, students of color to stay in academia is that there aren't as many role models that might look like you further on in the path, right? But to get more people to be in a department, you have to have someone who, you know, is the blank, or insert the blank, right? So first Latina woman, for example, in a department, first Black woman, first, et cetera, in a department. And to be that person, that's a lot of, that's a lot of stress, especially when it comes to sort of, you have this inherent expectation to, you know, fill a service role, be on lots of committees. This is true for women, people, minorities, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess I wondered, you know, you talked a lot about, or gave a lot of really great advice for faculty supporting students, but what about faculty supporting, you know, those faculty who end up in that sort of position?
You know, and if you read the research of the advanced program, and I'm using that a lot because we had so many years of experience with women faculty challenges, some of whom are women of color, that is helping us with our STRIDE program for people of color, men and women right now. And again, having the conversations about the service role, for example, teaching young faculty how not to say yes to everything, having someone in the department who can be supportive in deciding, should I say yes to this or not? All right. Or am I doing too much? And somebody who helps them in making sure the research is moving in the right direction. So having that mentor in the department and maybe one other is very important. But having community, and a lot of I'm sure you all have those grants. We have grants that are from NSF and other places, NIH training grants, where students get a chance to talk with each other and with faculty about how do you deal with this situation in my department, or when I'm the only Black woman there, or whatever, because it is challenging. It's not that you are a victim. It's just, if you're human, it's challenging. Let me say this to my colleagues. I would talk sometimes about the fact that there were so small numbers of Blacks in certain departments, in certain classes, and they said, well, Freeman, people have to grow up and just know we're nice people, just grow up. And so I said, okay. And I invited a group of white men to go with me to an HBCU in the inner city of Baltimore and to spend a day there. And when they came back, they were all transformed. The first thing they said was, people were nice to us, but there's something different when you're the only one looking like you. And these were guys in their 50s and 60s who for the first time had been in a minority. When I was in a master's program at Illinois in mathematics, there was only one woman in the department out of 100 faculty. And she had a way of looking at me that said, I understand what you're going through. And it helped just to know somebody else was like that. So it sounds like it's simple, but it isn't. I always say to people, if they want to get more understanding, go put themselves in a situation where they are the only one. And remember, and the difference is that there's no power. I mean, the fact is that these young faculty of color, young women, don't have any power. The good news is there are more and more men who do get the point. We've got so many of our allies on our campus who get it. And what I know is that there are many white men who want to be supportive. They just need to know what they can do to be supportive. You got to find them.
Okay. Thank you.
Joe Blatt.
Dr. Hrabowski, great to see you again, and thank you for another wonderfully inspiring speech, as you always do.
Thank you.
It seems like this is a positive moment for science at the national government level, finally, with the naming of people like Eric Lander to advise the president and a real openness to science. Do you think that there's anything that federal policy can do to contribute to supporting more people of color in science and following?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And a number of my articles that my colleagues and I wrote in Issues in Science and Tech, the PNAS article, and some others talk about some of those policy points. I would say, and I said this with my committee when we were chairing that underrepresentation group, that we needed the kind of program at NSF, for example, that parallels the advanced program. The advanced program has been designed to increase the number of women in science, and it's been wonderful. It's making a difference. We need that same kind of program for faculty of color if we're going to make some difference, because we are still primarily white at the professoriate level and at the research campuses even more so. And that would allow us to look at programs that will identify students early on, undergrad and grad, and prepare them for the professoriate and give them opportunities. For us, for example, using our own money, the postdoc programs that we have are focused on getting people in, giving them a chance to build their research, get to know people, and in 2 to 3 years, moving to a tenure track position. And that has been helpful to us, but we need those kinds of best practices across the board that people can use. Because quite frankly, this is what I said to my colleagues, a president or an administrator can't make anybody do anything. It has to be programs that our colleagues say, yes, we want to make a difference here. We want to see people come in and be successful, and we need to look at what makes a difference in ensuring success. So yeah, federal policies at NSF, NIH, and other agencies would be very important, will be very important. And I'm pushing for that.
Thank you, sir.
We're going to take 2 more questions, one from Daniel Eisenstein, and then appropriately enough, John Wilson.
Oh.
Yeah, Daniel Eisenstein, I'm on the faculty in astronomy. I want to first thank you for taking your time today to curate this whole event. I wanted to ask about, sort of go back to something we hit on early on. When we think about retention of students in undergraduates, it seems to me that first 1, 2, 3 months on campus is just extremely important. That's a time when a lot of attitudes are set, and a lot of people, I think, can get intimidated by what they see going on around them. And I'm just wondering what aspects of cohort building and mentoring in that first semester that you felt worked really well, and also what are some pitfalls that you've encountered. And I think, and I'm kind of been particularly curious about pitfalls surrounding association by identity, and which I could just imagine being really supportive for some people, but really off-putting for other people. And I'm just kind of curious as to how you've.
So let me start with the pitfalls. We were attracting very high achieving students. And the first criticism was, well, why wouldn't you just get average students to make a difference? Because I said, in America, the highest achieving Black kids rarely make it in science all the way to a PhD. You see that when you see literally in some agencies under 1% and at most 2%. And when you see in many departments, almost nobody Black in research universities, or maybe the 1 person, 1 or 2, in many departments, none. On my campus, we still are working on that in some departments. Now, the association point. Students coming out of high school who are high achievers want to be with high achievers. And what we were willing to do and what we were able to do is to make this a matter of prestige. To be a Malhoff is to be very prestigious. We take great pride in having many kids who could go to the Ivies who do not go, because we say we are better than they are when it comes to educate. I say I will send kids, for example, not Ivy, to MIT, come to me first, and we'll get you ready to go and get a PhD at MIT. We will give you that nurturing, because all you have to do is look at the analytics and you will see that. I mean, people may not like that, but that's the fact of the culture of institutions. Now, why would I say that so boldly? For this reason, what we say is, you are going to be the best, not only in the science, but in this area of building this challenge of moving away from underrepresentation to get leaders, and of all races. I mean, I would challenge you to look at what they've done now at Penn State and Chapel Hill, what we've done, and that is to talk about a program that's not just for Blacks or minorities, but that has its share of minorities. We're about 60% minority, but of some amazing young whites who want to understand, why is it that there were no Black kids in my gifted and talented class, in my honors class? What can I do to make a difference? So we are preparing students who will be faculty members, white, Black, Asian, Hispanic, who can talk about issues of race. So it's the notion of connecting the science to the big societal questions in our country. And quite frankly, to making it prestigious, to think about helping each other as opposed to thinking I can do it on my own. You know this, that the most fabulous science is occurring when people are working collectively in these groups. And we need ways of doing that, getting away from the cutthroat, but of having an association with a prestigious program. And right now, let me say this, right now, when the country is talking about structural racism and those issues, Harvard has a chance to connect what it does in preparing scientists who are going to deal with some of those issues through their humanities and other courses. And so you've got a great opportunity to become a leader in this space. And you're not now, and you should be.
John Wilson.
Hello, Freeman.
Hey, John, how are you?
Good to hear from you. And when people talk to me about you, I let them know what your secret is, and that is you as a Hampton grad have brought an HBCU thing to UMBC. And you've done it well. So I congratulate you for that. And my question, Freeman, is about the ecosystem. Really, when I was working at the White House, we saw across all HBCUs. And one of the things they're not doing that you've done quite well is you have a lot of latitude. You've reached out to other universities, destination institutions for your students. And I'm a little concerned that HBCUs aren't doing that as well now. I want you to know that one of my daughters that you and I talked a lot about got her PhD.
At Berkeley,
and is now a faculty member at MIT. And just last week, she just started, but she just made an offer to one of your students.
Oh, good.
And she said, Dad, my goal is to make an offer to some HBCU students as well. I want to underscore that point, that partnership. One of the best things that Harvard can do is to formalize this outreach. Now they're doing it with you because they're getting a lot of students there. But if you want to really excel as well, add to UMBC, Spelman, Morehouse, Howard, and a number of others, and be aggressive and formal about it. Get some funding and put somebody's name on it, equivalent to Meyerhoff, and really elevate it.
Yes.
For outreach, and that really will stock the pipeline. I'd like to talk a little bit more about that because I really do think if we're going to solve this problem and surge and accelerate, we're going to have more latitude, some peripheral vision here, and not just think we all have to do it ourselves.
It's an excellent point, John. And I can tell you, my kid who's about to finish his PhD there in math, the only one in his area at Berkeley, only one there, right? Wow. Knows your daughter well. And so congratulations to you and to Harvard, since I think she went to undergrad at Harvard. Let me say this, that I think we should be looking at some of those very high achieving HBCUs. You mentioned some of Morehouse and Spelman, Howard, Hampton, and one or two others, and those predominantly white universities that have made a lot of progress. If you get a chance, look at my articles. We have documented the top 25 institutions in producing Blacks with bachelors who go on to get PhDs. And there are several predominantly white universities. My grad alma mater, Illinois, in life sciences, for example, now is in that top group. In the top 10, you've got three of us who are not HBCUs. UMBC, we're number 2, but University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and University of Florida, for example, are in that group. If you look at the articles, what I'm suggesting to people is that they look at, and then of course you've got several of those HBCUs. If you look at those lists, you see who's having some success in sending students on to PhDs, number one. And you want to go to that group and form partnerships with them. We don't really have a formal partnership with Harvard. Harvard has been wonderful to me personally, and we have a few people who go back and forth, but it's nothing like the formal partnership we've developed with others, quite frankly. So the idea of developing one is something that would be delighted to do. I know we've got some faculty there at Harvard who've been wonderful to our students, and you've been wonderful to my graduate, Victoria. And we've had several come out of the PhD programs there who are now faculty at Hopkins and Columbia, coming out of Harvard's PhD programs. But let me say to you that I would suggest building partnerships and looking at what works, but also listening to graduates who've gotten PhDs to get advice from them about what might be possible. And finally, having people, when times are better by the fall, who will come down and visit the campuses whether it's Hampton or Howard but UMBC right here. I mean, where I'm back and forth doing the work over with new presidents in the Harvard program in education regularly. And I do work over at MIT. So it's easy with Boston Southwest to go back and forth. But building some of those relationships in research collaboration and training, quite frankly, I think could lead to a pipeline of students who could be there. And the way we do it with Hopkins, for example.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And for those who don't know, many of us drew inspiration from John's Martin Luther King Memorial Lecture that he shared with us in our division last year. So it's a real pleasure to see you and to have the two of you talk with one another. So we're at the end of our time. I cannot express profoundly enough my appreciation for your taking the time to share your perspective with us today. I hope you've come away from this with a sense that we are embarking on a path to change at this institution. It's hard work, we appreciate that. But just personally, you showing us that institutional change is possible is inspiration for us. And I thank you for that as much as anything else that you shared with us. And I salute you as a leader in higher education in the nation.
Thank you, Chris. I will just quietly, I will tell you when Drew and the university gave me the honorary degree, the last time we had seen a Black leader of a university getting one was Booker T. Washington, a fellow Hamptonian, in 1901. So I was truly honored. I'm honored to be connected to Harvard in many ways. Proud that you got John Wilson there. Really proud of my student Victoria and others that you're mentioning who are there now, and Joe, and what you've done and the connections we've had. So I've got a lot of great friends there. I'm delighted to be working with you. Work with us more closely. We can get you a pipeline of kids. I would love to be doing that. Okay, more than we do right now.
I heard the invitation and you'll be hearing from us. You can be absolutely certain.
Great.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Read my book, Empowered University. Read it. I'm saying that. Read that book.
And Dean Gay, would you care to share a closing comment?
No, absolutely. Thank you. This has been an inspiring hour and a half. And yours has been an inspiring career. So many lessons that we can learn from it. And the invitation that you've just extended to build a stronger relationship is one I see Chris nodding. I think we're both eager to take you up on that.
That's great. Thank you. Looking forward to working with you for sure. Go and Google Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett. It will give you goosebumps. Okay.
And thank you to all of our community for taking your time on this Friday to join us and being on this journey. And a good weekend to all. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.